Chapter 3. My First Time Fishing. I remember waking up my first morning in Florida. It was 5 a.m. I didn't know it yet, but I was a lucky kid to call it home. But what had I awakened to? I witnessed and participated in a bizarre, slow-motion shuffling of 4 barely conscious people in a very small cottage. Everyone was moving as if negotiating their way through warm, clear jello. Slowly, like cars in a busy parking lot. They were basing their next moves on what space was left open by the motion of the other groggy wanderers. Grandpa was ready first, with a cup of his famous paint-removing strength coffee in hand, ready to go. He could get ready faster than a nervous fireman if fishing was involved. My morning head fog instantly cleared when I had my very first sighting of a sizable American cockroach, or palmetto bug if it resides in Florida. An American cockroach in New York City can take a trip in a box of clothes on a moving van and end up with a new identity in Palm Beach County, bringing its street savvy to southern kitchens everywhere. Once it crosses the Florida-Georgia border, it becomes a palmetto bug. I could have easily developed a lifelong disdain and disgust for them if it hadn't been treated with the casual indifference that my grandfather showed for the brave one strolling behind him. It was moving slowly and deliberately away from the direction of the kitchen as if it was dragging his butt home from an all-nighter with the boys, chewing on an open plastic bread bag or breaching a poorly closed box of cereal. From then on, it was the smaller German roaches I feared, as opposed to the palmettos, because where there's one little one, it's a safe bet there are more. I'd see a palmetto bug and think it was attracted to the light and flew in here, a chance encounter and not an indicator of household uncleanliness. The palmettos were so big around there you could hear their flapping wings as they flew across the room. That was especially unnerving when laying in a dark bedroom. The adult males averaged 2 inches in length, big enough to turn on my grandparents' TV set. There were 2 metal strips a 1/4 inch apart on the front of their TV set, and it came on or turned off when your finger grounded the 2 together. It was the only one I had ever seen like that. I was looking at the funny pages of the Palm Beach Post when the TV came on by itself. I looked up to see a palmetto bug walking across the 2 bars, grounding them together and completing the circuit with his body. I suspected that it was attracted to the touch switch because someone had possibly used it with food on their finger. My grandparents used the old-time insecticide atomizer, or flit gun. It had a bike pump type of mechanism that pushed out a mist of black flag, a diesel-smelling pesticide that I believe only made these giant roaches smell bad. This lessened their chances to mate with the higher echelon of palmettos in their insectivore society, weakening the overall gene pool of the species. Soon everyone was ready and filing out to the car, the angling gear having been pre-packed by Grandpa on the wagon. We were prepared for a morning of fishing at the Lake Worth Bridge. Grandpa drove slowly out of the alley and pulled onto Lake Avenue, the wagon chugging along like the African Queen on wheels, making its way towards the water a 1/2 mile away. I noticed how clean and in place everything was along the road compared to the dirtier streets and alleys of big city Louisville. The streetlights proudly showcased intermittent sections of the home fronts as we strolled by at an almost parade-participating speed. This gave my backseat window view of the Patsy neighborhood a subtle tour of Emerald City feel. We pulled into the parking lot of Bryant Park, a city-run recreational area at the southwest foot of the Lake Worth Bridge. It was still dark. Grandpa handed out our gear, toting assignments with the efficiency of a wartime general who had drawn up a plan to do so. The slamming down of the wagon back door served as a starting gun for the rest of us, and we headed for the bridge. The salt smell in the air gave the scenario a clean feeling. It was as if a protective layer had been peeled from my sense of smell. I looked out over the water and wondered what lay beneath. It was hard for me to even populate in my imagination. The only fish I had ever seen were in the movie The Incredible Mr. Limpet. We walked on to the bridge and put everything where it was supposed to be. The flow of the water was headed south, so we set up on the south side of the bridge. This helped to keep the slack out of the lines when it was cast out and the bait was in place on the bottom. The tight line allowed you to feel every bump and nibble of the bait. A slack line allowed the bait to be sucked in without being noticed, allowing the fish to spit out the empty hook, like the pit of a cherry. I watched Grandpa cut up what appeared to be frozen muscle-bound insects, expertly skewing them onto hooks. I found out later they were called shrimp. The first time I saw someone eat a shrimp, I thought they were doing it on a dare, as I had only known them as fish bait. I remember seeing my first takeout order of Chinese food and saw that it came in a paper bait box. I thought, those poor people, they can't even afford to buy decent disposable food carriers. They have to use bait boxes. That must have been some great tasting food for customers to be willing to buy it in a shrimp container. I found out later that the bait sellers were using Chinese food containers. I had it backward. All the lines were baited and cast into the dark, murky liquid void of the intercoastal waterway at least an hour before sunrise. Grandpa showed me the fine art of holding the line between my thumb and forefinger to monitor the bait. I felt like a great fisherman about to catch a shark at any time. I did have fishing experience in Louisville, as my mother had bought me the Avon plastic fishes and fishing pole. I just had to snag the fish with the oversized plastic hook. There was one major problem that morning on the bridge. Grandpa had to cast my line back out every time I reeled it in. It visibly annoyed him when my distorted time estimations caused me to reel the line in too quickly to see if I still had my bait. He would glare at me with the same look Oliver Hardy would give the camera when frustrated with Stan Laurel. I learned to cast rather quickly that day. The first catch of the morning was the inedible sea catfish. It was then I saw my first creature die. It was as horrible of a death as my young mind could have imagined. Grandpa slammed it on the bridge road, the catfish making a guttural, wet tennis shoe on linoleum sound during the stunning process. I cringed as I witnessed the impact, feeling the blow empathetically. I found out later that Grandpa had been stabbed by one of the poisonous spines located on the front edge of a sea catfish fin the year before. I wondered if a living fish could see when out of water, and if so, can they process the fact that they're being held down and manhandled by a giant? What were the intelligence rankings among fish commonly caught in my area? I imagined science discovering that a sand perch to be ultra-aware of its surroundings. I'd feel guilty every time I made eye contact with one, probably attempting to apologize by making hand motions and facial gestures. As with most anything, repetition of a process creates a callus over the repeatedly affected empathetic receptors. I reasoned away the guilt with the notion that I was saving hundreds of smaller ocean creatures by taking these predators out of the mix, and fishing became fun for me. Hey, I'm out here saving baby mullet. I know we have to use some of them as bait, but the sacrifice of the few is sometimes necessary to save the lives of many. One day we pulled up a stringer of sand perch from the water and found only the heads remaining. It happened the next day as well, so Grandpa rigged a fish on a large hook and threaded it on to a stringer gill clip. At the end of the fishing day, he pulled up a 7-foot-long cutlass fish that had teeth like a buck-toothed ferret. I accidentally dropped my pole off the bridge on more than one occasion. The water was deep, dark, and moving. Grandpa would miraculously retrieve it with a couple of treble or snatch hooks and bell sinker rig on his pole. It was like watching a magic trick that also got me out of trouble. Grandpa was born to fish. He would stand there motionless, a virtual statue made of meat. Spiders could build webs on him and catch breakfast before he made his next move. He could decipher the bumps and tugs at the end of the line with his fingers, a necessary skill to catch the nibbling perch. Of course, I caught nothing, my bait not having time to sink to the bottom before I was reeling it back in. I quickly tired of that and watched Grandpa fish from a safe distance, making sure not to harvest a look of disdain. Don't get me wrong, he wasn't a grump. He was just a no-nonsense kind of guy, a sweaty John Wayne, if you will. I had the opportunity to live with my grandparents in Kentucky for a couple of years. That went a long way in my interactions with him in Florida. Out of their many grandkids, I was the only one not semi-scared of them. I loved it when someone would get a fish on. I'd be right there to witness every foot of line retrieved and imagined what could be at the other end of the tight, vibrating line as it cut through the water in a drunken, spirographic pattern. I'd peer into the water, wanting to see the very first glimpse of what was putting up such a good fight. We left an hour after sunrise to go home, where I witnessed the carnage involved with the cleaning of a fish. It's pretty traumatic stuff for a 6-year-old, especially if it was done while they were still alive. I believe Grandma enjoyed setting up her legged metal dinner trays in front of people because of her ability to erect them in seemingly one motion. She would walk over to the stash trays, her bad hip causing a Walter Brennan-like hitch in her step. Once in front of the hungry diners, she would snap a tray into position with the deftness of a riverboat gambler shuffling a deck of cards. She would walk off with a look of cockiness on her face and a touch of swagger in her subtle hobbling. I remember watching the local news that evening and wondering which fish I was eating.